Hello and welcome to English 1302 online. This week is Module 2. We are in week 5. And this week we are moving on to our second author in Module 2, Kurt Vonnegut. So you should have already turned in your research report number 1. If you haven't, please consider doing that as soon as possible. I'll be getting those grades back to you again as soon as possible with feedback. So Kurt Vonnegut, interesting character. I would love to give you a whole lecture about him, but instead we are going to be doing exactly the same thing that we did with Shirley Jackson, in that we're going to be doing the life and times of Kurt Vonnegut, where you go out as a class and discover who Kurt Vonnegut was, one interesting fact at a time. So when you do this assignment, please be sure to go out, find an interesting fact about him that you personally find interesting. Tell me why you find it interesting and try to be the first person with that fact. Everybody should have a different fact. Only use one so that there's plenty of facts to go around. Uh, but be sure to find one and tell us why you think it's interesting. And as always, there's the first post is due by the first date, and the second post will be due by the final date. Actually, the two responses to people's uh, initial posts will be due by the second date. So that's here. And we are continuing on our journey of research reports, and the difference between this research report and our first research report is that we will be using APA formatting for this particular report, whereas last report we used MLA. And then finally, remember, on the third report that we do, we will be using your choice, whether it's APA or MLA. So whichever one that you find uh, better to use, or if your particular career path is going to be using one or the other more, then I would suggest using the one that you'll be using the most. Most people find that MLA is fine, uh, but if you are going into any of the sciences, you may be using APA. If you're going into history or any other social sciences, it could be APA, it could be Chicago Turabian. Unfortunately, we don't go over Chicago Turabian, but the book does. And as such, the recommended reading for this particular module is the chapter on APA in our gradebook, not our gradebook, I'm sorry, in our textbook. However, if you don't have access to the textbook anymore, it's fine. I have plenty of APA sources here in writing resources that can help you out with that right here under the APA information. I'll be going over APA formatting in more detail next week. This week we're focusing on just getting to know who Kurt Vonnegut was and reading his short stories that we'll be basing our second research paper on. So much like we did with Shirley Jackson, we're going to do Life and Times of Kurt Vonnegut, and then we have the two stories that Kurt Vonnegut wrote that we'll be taking a look at. Our first one is Harrison Bergeron, and you may have read this in school, and that's fine. I read it multiple times throughout my academic career, starting in 8th grade, all the way up to in college. So it's a good story, and I found at least that I got something different every time I read it based on where I was in my life at that time, and I think you will too. So we're reading Kurt Vonnegut. The discussion questions are here for Harrison Bergeron. Then To Be or Not to Be is the second story, not as well known as Harrison Bergeron, but still just as important. Harrison Bergeron really deals with the ideas of equality and equity and how those might work out. Vonnegut had a pretty tragic life, actually, which you'll find out when you take a look at those facts that you put up for the life and times of his life. Um, and it really influenced how he looked at the world. But I will say that he considered himself a humanist. He was very much into humanity, and his catchphrase was "Be kind," as well as "So it goes." So there's a couple of things. To be or not to be is not so much, well, I mean, I guess it kind of is about a little bit about equality and equity, but also about personal freedom. Actually, they both kind of are. So, kind of apropos as we come up on the 4th of July at the end of this week. So, be sure to take a look at both of these. There are discussion questions at the end of both. Please answer those. Um, the other the other assignment, let's see, that we have this week, we do have the Life and Times. We have both Harrison Bergeron and To Be or Not to Be, and we have Kurt Vonnegut and the Dystopia, which is the genre that he basically kind of fits into. He fits into a lot of different genres. We're kind of looking at his dystopic works. And this talks about what is a dystopia. There's actually a video in this assignment, how to recognize a dystopia. It's a short TED talk, and there's a couple questions. First of all, I want you to know, which of the two stories do you think is more dystopian and why, based on how the dystopia is defined in this video. And then I would also like you to comment on what you think Kurt Vonnegut would say about the America we're living in right now. He was fiercely patriotic, and he loved America and he loved people. He didn't like politics, but who does? But in any case, that's the secondary discussion board we have for the week. The first one being the Life and Times of Kurt Vonnegut. If we take a look at the calendar for this week for the due dates, Life and Times, and the Dystopia, your initial post is due on both of these on the 30th. And actually, Vonnegut and the, yeah, I think it's the initial date. Yeah, there it is. The initial date is due on the 30th, which I believe is Tuesday this week. That means you have to make your initial post by then, and then you have to reply to two other classmates' posts on both of those by the 2nd. And then I also have Harrison Bergeron and To Be or Not to Be due by the 2nd. And the reason that the due dates are this way is because the college is technically closed on Friday for July 4th holiday, even though it's July 3rd. And we really can't make anything due on Friday or Saturday of this week. So I had to move the due dates up. Now, that being said, I won't be looking for these assignments until after the holiday. But I do recommend reading the two stories sooner rather than later, and just trying to get this done a little bit earlier so you can enjoy the weekend is probably a good idea. So that's what we have due this week. I do want to point out, if we take a look at the calendar, we are here on the 30th. I'm sorry, not the 30th. We are here on the 28th of June, and we are fixing to go into July. We are starting week 5 of a 10-week course, which means counting week 5, we only have basically 6 more weeks of this course left. So we're going to have 3 weeks on Vonnegut and then 3 weeks on our third module. This week we are doing the introducing. Next week, if we take a look at July, next week we'll be turning in our peer reviews. And then the week after that, we'll be turning in the final research report for Vonnegut. So it's moving along quite quickly. And if you notice, we don't have any chapter work due this week because we've already gone over it. You are, of course, welcome to take a look at any of the content from research report number 1. It's all there. You can still go back and take a look at all the different writing guides and how to write a research paper and developing your working thesis, etc. A lot of that information is also in writing resources, but anything that we went over in Module 1 is applicable to Module 2, because Module 2, we're writing the same kind of research report. It's just over a different author, Vonnegut, and it's in a different format, APA. We will be doing the same thing with Asimov when we get to Module 3. Uh, do have a few things to point out here. Like I said, the recommended reading is really just the APA style guide and the research module. So if you do still have access to the book or you bought the book, you can look at those in that textbook. If you have a hard copy of the book, you can take a look at there. If you don't have access and you don't have the book, it's okay. There's plenty of information and writing resources that is covered there too, which is part of the reason I was letting you guys know that it wasn't absolutely necessary to purchase the book. Um, there's a handy guide here that tells the difference between MLA and APA, which you can take a look at. We will take a look at this in more detail next week in this lecture. And then there's one other thing I wanted to point out. I do have a couple of videos here as a supplement to the stories. And the first video is the Harrison Bergeron video. It's actually entitled 2081 because that's when the story takes place. In fact, both of our stories take place in an imaginary future America. So be aware of that when you're looking at it. 2081 is a particularly good video to represent Harrison Bergeron. It isn't exactly the same as the story in terms of how it is presented, and you'll see what I'm talking about once you've read the story. Uh, but it does have the same spirit of the story. And it was made after Vonnegut passed away, and I believe that I think he would have liked this story. Um, it's got two different versions. There's one without commercials, which you may be required to enter your email address in order to view the film, but they will never contact you. I've never been contacted in the many years that I've been teaching this and watching the video. But if you're not comfortable with putting your school email into there, you can always watch it here on YouTube. It does have commercials. So if you have the free version of YouTube like me, it'll have commercials. If you don't, maybe it won't have commercials. So just there you go. Um, then there is a version of To Be or Not to Be, and it is very close to the story. There's a few subtle differences that really don't make much, and you probably wouldn't notice them if you hadn't been reading the story for years like I have. So this is actually a pretty good video. I will warn you, it is pretty graphic, so be aware going in. But those are the two videos related to the stories. Now, the catch here is that you can't watch the videos until you have read the stories. Um, so be sure to read the stories. And that is honestly as it should be. The stories are set up just like they were for Shirley Jackson. You have someone reading the story. So you have the audio of the story. Then there is the copy, the PDF copy here of the story, along with the discussion questions. And also, just like Shirley Jackson, I have the APA references entry here for you for when you are ready to write your paper and use this on your references page. And the same goes with To Be or Not to Be. We have the audio, the story, the discussion questions, and then the references entry. So that's what I'm looking for this week. The life and times of Kurt Vonnegut, very important, uh, as this is our class discussion about him. So be sure to go out and find something interesting and discuss it. The two stories with discussion questions, which please be sure to take a look at those because you'll be writing a paper about them. And then Vonnegut and the dystopia, which again is another discussion board, but introduces us to the idea of dystopia and how Vonnegut fits into that. So let's see, be sure that you listen to lectures. You remember to view the announcements. There will be a grade associated with opening up the announcements, opening up the lectures, and basically your participation in the class. Please be sure not to use AI. I've found that a lot of people are resorting to using AI on the everyday assignments, and those will get a 0, as well as marked down on a list. And then the list basically becomes the people that I'm looking at the most for AI. So please don't use AI. It's not allowed in this class except for that one assignment that we did with it. It's only allowed for planning, not for writing. It's never allowed for completing assignments. And don't use it to check your work, because if you do that, for example, on Grammarly, which uh, honestly, you shouldn't be doing that in English class, because how will I know what you know? But if you do use it, it will mark it as being AI generated or AI enhanced, and that's again against the policy for the class. So remember, failing your class that you need is not worth it. You will lose less points by having a single grammar mistake or some punctuation mistakes than you would for the 0 you're going to get if it comes up as being AI enhanced or AI generated. So if you have any questions about what might be considered AI, please, 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 please email me. I understand more than you think. I do like AI for lots of things, just not writing papers or answering our daily assignments. All right, that being said, have a happy 4th of July. I think 250 years of existing as a country is fairly impressive in this modern day and age. I realize there's countries that have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but I'm pretty proud of ours. So, in any case, have a great week. If you have any questions, be sure to email.